Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Corporate Quitter. Today's episode, I want to talk about bad investments I've made in my creator business. Not like stocks and bonds and investing in the stock market, none of that. I'm specifically talking about products I've purchased, subscriptions I've had, money I've put towards conferences, coaches, like all of that stuff. I want to get into I would say my top worst investments. Now, before we get into today's episode, I want to give a big thank you to Novo. They are not a bank, they're a fintech company. I've been using them for the past 6 months to basically help me get my business in order. So they really help with everything from invoicing to reserves, which is a feature that helps you kind of divvy up money organically into different accounts to help plan for things like taxes, purchasing maybe new equipment for my podcast, like whatever it is. It really helps to keep money separate and in the places they need to be so I could plan better for the future. Novo and I have partnered up to co-host an event here in Austin, Texas. That event will be on Thursday, August 15th. If you are in Austin, would love for you to come, whether you're a business owner or not. I would love to see you in person. So come hang out at our Quitter event. It'll be at Wanderlust Wine Co. In the description here will be a link to sign up for that. There is a reservation that's required. Also, if you join Novo through the link that's posted here, you'll get $40 and it's completely free to sign up. Okay, now let's get into the meat of the episode. So part of the reason why I'm talking about this, even though obviously if you see me on social, I've basically talked about this topic amongst many others for the entirety of my business, right? The time that I've been in business for 4 years. I've always been open and honest in how much I've made, how much I've spent in a good and bad ways, things that are working, things aren't, breakups, people that I got together with, like everything, right? So I recently did an Ask Me Anything on Instagram stories. If you're not following me on Instagram, highly recommend it because that's where all the juiciness is. But so I did an Ask Me Anything, which I hadn't done in a while. And some of the questions that were posed were really good ones. And one of them was, again, talking about bad investments as a creator. So the thing with investments, right, is that it's really hard to gauge what worked and what didn't because much like any investment, it doesn't happen overnight, right? If you think about the traditional way of investing, people usually think the stock market, and the stock market every year is like roughly 7 to 8% return. Now, the thing that everyone knows with the stock market is like, number one, you invest your money into it and hope for a good return, right? There's no guarantee with that. There's plenty of history to show that you will get a return, but there's no guarantee that what you put in, you're going to get back, right? That's just the hope. Now, the other thing with investments is that more often than not, it's a long-term game. And not only like just a year long-term, I'm talking like over years and years, right? I forget what the actual stats are, but I'm pretty sure Warren Buffett, like he finally got his return or like made the most money in his 70s or 80s because he held out long enough, which is a crazy amount of time in my opinion. But so when I think with the term investment in your time, money, and energy, because in my brain, I don't think of investments as just monetary value. I think of, again, like energy because everything has an energetic frequency and what you put your focus on, energy, money, people, opportunities flow to that. You don't have to believe in that, but that's what I believe in. But the other thing too is like your time as well as an investment, right? The things that you actually spend a decent amount of time on fleshing out, whether it's a career, a partnership, right? Someone you're romantically with, platonic friends, anything like that. Everything is an investment of sorts. But also when dealing directly with investment vehicles, it's hard to determine what worked and what didn't. And the other thing too is like in the short term, some of the things that I've done might have seemed dumb, but now a couple of years in, I'm realizing like, oh, it was actually really beneficial, or this is the silver lining. So I did a little digging and just did like a quick like overview of like, what did I spend a lot on, or even like, what did I spend a little on that I don't really know if it fully panned out quite yet, right? I haven't seen the full return on my investment. So the thing is, like I said, it's really hard to find the through line of what has worked and what hasn't, because the reality is that some of the things I've spent money on, I might not actually see the return on that for quite a while, right? Way down into my career. But these are kind of the top things that I think I probably could have been a bit smarter about and or maybe could have just not done at all. So the first is clothes for appearances. Now you might think that's dumb, but as someone who very much believes you have to look the part in order to create the job you want, to have the income, feel the way you feel, right? I purposely got dressed up like this for this podcast episode. I don't do this all the time, but whenever I try to kind of flip on that switch, right? That alter ego, that person who's going to show up and be a certain way, you need to dress the part. That's how I feel, right? Even in my corporate job, especially having a teaching degree and being on Wall Street, I already felt like a fish out of water. I didn't feel like I belonged there. So at least dressing the part and like faking it till you make it, even though I wasn't really faking it, but you know what I mean, to me was important. So as I was building up my creator career, I found that my clothes didn't obviously represent who I was anymore. So right at the get-go, when I quit my corporate job about it 6 months in, I did a full clear out of my closet. I donated everything that I could that I felt had either old energy tied to it or it was an old identity that I no longer wanted to be part of. Whether it was like really old blazers that I'd had for like a decade, turtlenecks, like whatever it was, color wise, there were also a lot of plain colors, a lot of blacks, browns, navies. I was in this place of wanting to be more expressive. So naturally, I was like, you know what? I'll start over with my wardrobe and I'll get things that more align with my current self or my future self, right? And my future self, I saw someone who was doing things on camera, who was at panels, who was, I wouldn't say necessarily walking red carpets, but doing things that were in the appearance or entertainer category, right? As a podcaster and a creator, it's a weird sort of world you're in. I haven't done the full count on how much I've spent, but I would say over the past 3 years, but more specifically in 2022 was a lot. I've probably spent at least $5,000 on clothing. And these aren't like, oh, I have to go like get new underwear, like those staple things. Oh, I have to like get a new pair of leggings. No, I'm talking about like those hefty pieces of clothing. So I have purchased multiple like two-piece suits that have like feathers. One's green, one's purple. There was one that has like all these like glittery sequins on it. I think this actual shirt was part of that, and thankfully I wear this on occasion. But some of those jumpsuits and things like that, shoes that I purchased that were like red carpet pieces, I probably didn't need to buy. Granted, each of those I've used to an extent for panels, for, again, like I wouldn't say walking the red carpet, but I got my podcast award last year. There was a whole thing with the backdrop with the photographers that I wore. And again, wearing a bright green suit, I stuck out like a sore thumb. I look like the mask. That's how much I stuck out at this event, which is kind of the point. But in hindsight, when I was a growing business and didn't make that much money, it probably was stupid to put $1,000 on a credit card for clothes that, number one, might not be something I actually use. And number two, like, my health has been changing. I change. Who's to say that I'm going to fit into that, in the future anyway? So that's something that I think I could have spent less money on and been more strategic about. But ultimately, like, all of those pieces of clothing did help to get me to where I am now. And I do still use some of them, the ones that I do fit into for certain things. So it's kind of a 50-50 on that one. The next thing is travel. So I surprisingly, even though I've traveled quite a lot over my past few years of doing this, and if you look through all my content, you can see, I think over the course of my 3 years of doing creator stuff, I've probably been on over 50 flights. Like, I have traveled quite a lot. Now, most of the time people think, oh, it's because you're traveling to go on vacation. But the reality is I'm not. And I actually haven't. I haven't been on like a proper vacation where I'm like, oh, we're specifically going here to rest and recover in years. I probably since my corporate job, because I've been working on building this business. Where I have traveled is to conferences, to places to meet new connections or continue building on connections. I live now in Austin, Texas. My family and all of my, my network is in New York. So I do travel back and forth for that. But also, I think the bulk of my travel, surprisingly, is, well, not surprisingly, but again, when I looked back and was kind of running numbers and seeing what things, how reckless, right? How problematic my spending was, I realized that most of my travel was related to once in a lifetime opportunities. So, for example, I was pitched by a colleague of mine to do an in-person podcast, a co-hosted show together. So that prompted some travel expenses to try to have that work. We did a couple of flights. We had maybe a couple episodes, did photo shoots, all the like, and then realized very quickly it just wasn't going to work out. So that project kind of fell to the wayside. I've also done that with other things too. I've done documentaries that I had to go to New York for and spent a couple days on. And thankfully, a lot of these once in a lifetime opportunities, I've been able to work in the contract or agreement that some of my flight expenses are covered. But sometimes things happen that just aren't, they're not kind of out of your control. And there are also these things, these pivotal moments that I would say the universe or whoever the powers that be have been forcing me to do certain things. So for example, when I lost all my income overnight from a brand deal that was supposed to span a year that ended at 4 months, in October 2022, I was fucking lost. I didn't know what to do because here I was. I thought I had my whole year covered. And now I had to go back to the basics and kind of refigure out what I was going to do. Now, fast forward, I ended up creating my freelance business about 2 months later. And that has been the bulk of my income for the past year. So it actually was like the silver lining of that moment was to pivot and find something else. But going back, so that moment I was kind of like, fuck, what do I do? I thankfully had saved up $5,000. It's the most that I had since I had quit my job. But I knew very quickly if I didn't come up with something or get like re-inspired or excited about whatever it was I was going to do next on my path, that that money was going to go away really, really quickly. And so I had this $5,000 and then all of a sudden it dropped out of nowhere, this opportunity for sort of a conference or an event in New York. Now the ticket itself was like $5,000 and I was like, well, I don't have that. And I mean, I do, but like that's rent money, right? And then the other thing is I had to get my ass there, which means I need to figure out flight cost, like travel, subway, right? If I was going to stay with a friend, make arrangements that way, food, all of this stuff, even baggage fees, like this stuff, it just adds up, right? So in this opportunity, I'm again not going to go too much in the detail of it, but let's just say all the stars aligned. So the person running the event, there was one ticket left and she found a liking in me. She said I had the it factor. She wanted to talk to me. After talking to her and explaining to her my situation, how I felt called to go, but I just didn't have the resources, she slashed the price in half. So the ticket for the whole weekend was now $2,500. So I was like, fuck yeah. But in the back of my brain, I'm like, that's not rational. How the fuck do I go to this? Like, I could meet potential media contacts. I could expand my network. I could learn something that's going to help. Like, I feel like I need to go here, but I don't know how to make it work. Well, when I tell you the universe conspired, the universe conspired because all I had to do was send the signal of like, hey, I think this is going to be important for me. I feel called to do this. Spent the $2,500 to get the ticket. And then within a few days, a friend offered to pay for my flight through travel points. Another two friends, literally two more friends. One paid for breakfast and coffee one day. The next day, a different friend, did the same thing, coffee and breakfast. My boyfriend at the time, he helped me with some other things like making sure I had a meal in around dinner. Like, so it felt like my entire community sort of came in this moment and was like, no, you need to go to this. And so in my brain, I'm like, it was a stupid investment, but also it ended up being the thing that kind of not only expanded my network, but got me excited again and tried to, get out of this hopeless feeling, which then created my freelance business. So like, there isn't a direct connection of like, hey, I invested in college and then college got me the job, right? There's a clear through line, but ultimately I think whatever I've spent on travel, let's say it's roughly about $5,000, if not a little more, was I think worth it regardless. The next thing is subscriptions. So the thing is with subscriptions that's really hard is that like you don't really know what's going to work until you're in it. So ultimately at the peak of running this business, I think I was spending about $2,500 a year on subscriptions. So the most expensive being Kajabi, which is $150 a month. And then there were some other ones that just like, again, the little ones add up, right? The one that's $10, $11, like all of a sudden it's just thousands of dollars a year. Now, when I think about like financial advice, traditional financial advice, and they say like cut your lattes and you'll be able to buy a home, I think that's complete bullshit because in this case, number one, a few $1,000s is not really going to make that much of a difference personally. But also, again, this is an investment to see what products and services work, which subscriptions are working for my business. So ultimately, it ended up just being a write-off. Many of these products I ended up using to learn the basics and then found either one that was better suited for me or whatever it was. But either way, the knowledge that I needed and created within practicing with these subscriptions was really the thing that helped me to become comfortable with just selling online and like building things. Now, when anyone asks me, hey, what about this product, this one, this, like I've literally used everything under the sun. So there's nothing that I can't help people with, which is a great thing if you're a teacher. And I'm a teacher, right? I create and I teach people how to help basically build their businesses online. But I would say that was probably not like a dumb investment. I think there are good investments that were made with that. Like I don't think those are bad. But the two biggest investments that I've made that I can't 100% justify, but ended up working out well was one, a high performer health program, and two was, I wouldn't say it's like a program or anything, but I moved way too soon. So I'll start with the high performer health program. So the health program, I think it was an entire year and I think it roughly came to about 18 grand. But if I factor in all the other things of like the food I had to eat, tests I had to run, things like that, it probably came to about $20,000 that I didn't have. So that was right on a credit card. And part of this is because when I quit my job and I was recovering from burnout and I also got off the pill at the same time, my body went fucking berserk. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see what I look like now. My hair is really long, it's healthy, my skin looks good. Like I would think I have a bit of a glow to me, but I didn't have this before. At one point, I think 3 months into quitting, my nervous system was still freaking out and I started to see the results of that. So I was starting to become really inflamed. My skin was really bad. I had adult acne again, just covered with acne. I hadn't had that since high school. I also was like not fitting into my clothes because I was becoming inflamed, which meant I had to go buy more clothes or like wear things that weren't like great looking to just make sure that I fucking wore clothes when I was doing things publicly. The other thing too is that I was starting to get really, really exhausted. So trying to just function was fucking just so hard. When you are just burnt the fuck out and you are tired, and ladies, I know you listening, you definitely feel this to your core. Like you can sleep 10, 12 hours and you will still be fucking exhausted when you wake up. So the health thing, after about 6 months of trying to figure out on my own and realizing, okay, I'm pretty sure number one, this is a hormonal issue. Number two, this is a stress issue, right? My cortisol levels are probably out of the fucking roof because I'm building a business. And I also just threw this monkey wrench in with like getting myself off the pill and moving in my family. Like there's just all these fucking stressors at once. But then also like, I didn't have the mental capacity to try to figure out what the fuck to do. I was like, I just want someone who knows what they're doing to see what's going on, run tests, tell me what to do so I can get back to doing what I'm good at as this business is exploding. So I ended up locking that in. She was a guest on my show, so I felt comfortable with her. And so we did that for a year. And even though the way that this was positioned, it was for high performers and it was sort of focused on people who were running businesses. So it worked really well from a write-off standpoint. But it still was crushing because every single month I was getting charged like $1,200 or whatever it was. And granted, I knew it was a good thing because it was going towards my health, right? I was getting nutrition plans and meeting with them every single week, both individually and as a group. So I was getting all the support I needed and the guidance and all of this. But at the same time, my brain is like, fuck, like I should be putting this in my business, not in my fucking health. But ultimately, right, I needed to take care of that because in my brain, I was also like, okay, if I pay for this now, I'm basically preventing issues in the future. Or at least that's how I thought. I'm like, if I can clear my skin now, if I can reduce my inflammation now, if I can get to a place where I feel good again and can actually get out of bed and I feel excited about what I do versus sleeping for fucking 16 hours and still being exhausted. And when you're exhausted, you can't run a business. I was like, all right, I'll bite the bullet now and fucking knock on wood, hope that this works out. If you can see, my skin has been repaired. I know what works for my body. I still am dealing with the repercussions of the weight gain and fluctuations and stuff like that. But that's something that's just going to come eventually when my stress levels decrease and I have more systems in my business. But ultimately, I think looking back, I wish I found maybe a program that was cheaper, but also 3 years ago, no one was really talking about hormonal imbalances and cortisol issues and PCOS and all of these things. And everyone running a business and being a creator wasn't as mainstream as it is now. So I try to give myself grace for that investment and knowing and hoping that it will pan out to be the way that I want it to be, right? That it actually made sense that I did it, but there's no guarantee that it was money well spent. Now, the last thing is moving too soon. So everyone knows probably your biggest expense is your housing, right? And so when I quit my job to build my business, because the first time I did it, I failed because I had an apartment. This time around, I decided to move back home with my parents. So I sold all my belongings, I gave up my apartment, and I moved back home. And after being home for a year, I was like beyond fucking, I didn't want to be there anymore. I was losing my shit trying to battle it out. My family of like, guys, I'm trying to record a podcast, be quiet, or do this or do that. Or like, again, being the oldest daughter, you can call it eldest daughter syndrome. I was just always in their shit. And here I am trying to build a business and like, I'm trying not to make their problems my problems, but it's really hard when you're, again, in that situation. So I was already beside myself after a year of living there. So from March 2021 to 22. And then around that same time, I had recently gone through a breakup. So between like wanting to get the fuck out of my parents to then going through this breakup and being like, fuck, now I live at home, I'm single. Like girly wants to get back out. I want to feel good. I just was in this place of like, we need to do something for ourselves. And also the other thing too is like, I wanted to remove myself from the only place I've ever known and separate myself from my family and my environment that I grew up in to discover like this new version of myself post corporate. Because I think I took a lot of my personality from corporate and even the conditioning I've had from the person that I dated and the friends that I was around and put it into my business. And that's not what I was trying to do. I was trying to create something different. So, me moving, I think, was a really great thing, right? Once I got my refund from my job from the previous year, which was about 5 grand, I was like, fuck it, I'm going to move. If it's the right choice, right? If it's the right move to move, the universe will align and everything will pan out and the price will be right. And I'll do this probably almost immediately. And I did. I think I got the check in the mail the middle of March, like right after the breakup happened. And then a week later, I got a signed deal for about, again, that 9 month brand deal to pay me about 4 grand a month. So I was like, cool, I've got the coverage to pay for the apartment. And then I put in an application for an apartment. They approved me immediately. And I was like, oh, fuck. Okay. Okay. So I think the universe again conspired to do that because I needed to get the fuck out of my environment to discover who I was. And ultimately I did, right? I discovered painting. I was more expressive. I went to singing lessons. I did drum lessons. If I didn't move, I don't think I would have gone to my friend's wedding, who was in Oregon, who then I met my ex-boyfriend at, who then helped me kind of be better at sales. And so there was just this kind of like domino effect that happened because I moved to Austin. And honestly, from a financial place, it was probably stupid. Like, I wasn't really making that much money in my business, but I did have a contract in hand for a brand deal that was going to pay me. And I also just got a check in the mail for 5 grand. So my brain is like, this is your opportunity. This is your golden moment. Like, sure, maybe if your apartment's 2 grand a month, you're paying $24,000 a year. That would be great to bank, but also, like, what would you be sort of missing out on if you didn't take advantage of this now? And all I could think to myself was like expression and meeting new people and getting out of the house and all this stuff, because I didn't want to do exactly what I did in corporate and be a workaholic and like just not see the potential of who I could be by removing myself from that environment. So ultimately, I think between, again, if you're paying 20 grand a year for health stuff and $24,000 that year for moving, like, and I only made $42,000 that year. I basically was in the negative, right? And that doesn't include food and costs like that. So when you look at the actually balance sheet, if you will, I was in the red for all of 2022. And last year, 2023, was the first year that I was in the either neutral or positive. So we're expanding and it's working in the way that it needs to. But I would think between all those things, I probably could have been a bit smarter about how I did it, right? Maybe not moved into the apartment I moved into, maybe went to one that was half the price in a different area of the city, maybe spent less money on a health program. Like, but it's the past. I can't really do anything. I've already made these decisions. And ultimately, it's what's led me here, where, I do live in an apartment right now with my boyfriend and we have a cat. And, this past December was the first time I made $10,000 in my business. And just this April, I made another 8. So like, I'm seeing the progression and even my expression is expanding. So I think we're on the right path. It just really stinks that I had to spend a lot in order to become the person that I needed to be so that I can step into, what do we want to call it? Like wealth activation, whatever the fuck it is that you want to call it. But either way, thing that at least I can say that makes me feel good about this entire thing is, number one, I've paid off debt before, right? I've paid off my student loans. I've paid off credit cards before, just did it when I was at a job. So there's no reason why I can't do it again. But also, like, bitch wants to write a book. I want to do all these things. I want to keep doing my podcast. I want to keep being forward facing and being a storyteller. But you can't be a storyteller if you don't have a story to tell, right? You can't write a book if you don't have a good story to tell. So ultimately, me spending all this money and kind of creating this really chaotic story, though, I think are some patterns that I've had to work through in, the subconscious, right? Creating chaos because it's more comfortable than having stability. I think also there's something to be said about naturally crafting a story that is book worthy, that will fulfill future dreams of mine, because everything that I've done to this point hasn't been easy, or actually I would say it's been easy, but it's also been really hard. But every time I talk about it, people are like floored by it. So if that's the reality now, imagine what's going to happen 10 years from now, right? Because I'm trying to play the really, really long game with this. And just like I talked about before, the Warren Buffett example, it took him 70 years to reap the rewards of his investments. And for me, what if it takes me a couple more years? I said that I would stop doing this at 35 if I felt like I wasn't good at it. I said by 30, when I started at 28, if I didn't make any progress that felt like it was like worth a career progressing, I would go back to corporate. So I'm still hitting my marks. They just don't look the way that I want them to. But again, I'm just 31 now. So I still have 4 years to make a return on this and make it feel like I actually did make a good investment. But again, a good investment happens over the long term, not the short term. So I just wanted to be transparent about that because someone had brought it up. I think it's a really great conversation to be had. I'm happy to go into detail about more things, but for any of you who are like looking at what you've spent to create your business, number one, know that you know what's best. I knew what I needed to do and what I needed to invest in order to make the difference in my life. And sometimes what people say is bad investments are actually great investments for you. But also the other thing too is that at some point in time, you have to stop spending money. So if you just keep saying, oh, when I learn more, when I look this way, when I do this and that, then I can make the sale, then I can start the podcast, then I can put myself on the internet, you're always going to look for validation from an outside place and never actually do the damn thing. So there is a fine balance. So if you're finding that you're constantly seeking out certifications and all these things that validate your reasoning for doing what you're doing, you have to stop and actually do an audit and be like, hey, are we actually doing this for a good reason, or is this creating problems purposely for the fact of you actually having issues with just accepting yourself for who you are and the worth and value that you already have innately within you? So I'm going to leave you on that deep little nugget to process, but I hope this episode was helpful. Again, for many of you who are just starting your journey, I know the beginning sucks because you're spending a lot and maybe not making a lot. And you're just like, when is the pain and suffering of the empty bank accounts like gonna, kind of pan out? I can't guarantee that it will work out the way you want it to, but I can guarantee if you stick it out long enough, something's gonna fucking give. So have a great week, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.